This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 223 of the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network. Ever feel like your school is trying all the right strategies like social skills groups, planners, behavior charts, but students still struggle with time management, motivation, and peer relationships? You're not alone, and there's a reason why. I actually hear this pain point quite commonly among school leaders as well as other school professionals. And the reason is that there is still a lot of misconceptions about executive functioning and its impact on students. That's why I wanted to share a clip from my free training in this episode. The free training is called Create a Research-Based Executive Functioning Implementation Plan for Your School Team. It's designed for school leaders who want to guide their teams in embedding executive functioning support across both general and special education settings without burning out staff. This episode is for you if you're ready to help students truly benefit from academic instruction, support social emotional growth alongside learning, and avoid overwhelming your team with another initiative. In the training, I'll reveal why social skills groups often fall flat and how to really boost students' emotional regulation and peer connections, the truth about planners, lists, and behavior charts, and why they're not improving students' time management or motivation, at least the way most people implement them, and the 3 key elements school teams need to support executive functioning across general and special education without burning out staff. So in this episode, it is a clip of the first half of the training. So I share element number 1. And if you want to listen to the full training and see it in video format and learn about all 3 key elements, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/EFteams. But this is an audio version of the first half so that you can learn more about the service delivery models that need to be in place in order to fully support executive functioning, as well as get a taste of what the full training is about. So again, if you are interested in learning more about how to create a research-based implementation plan for your school teams that supports executive functioning, check out my free training at drkarendudek-brannan.com/EFteams. Now let's get into the episode where you can hear the first half of the training. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so excited to share this information with you. I'm Karen Dudek-Brannan, and this is how to create a research-based executive functioning implementation plan for your school team. So we're going to do some quick housekeeping in just a minute here, just to give you a quick introduction. Again, as I said, my name's Karen Dudek-Brannan, and I help school teams and special education professionals develop programming and interventions for supplemental literacy and language interventions, as well as executive functioning interventions. And I help people do that across the continuum of services, across tier 1, 2, 3, and into special education. And that concept of a continuum is actually going to be an important concept that you'll take away from this presentation today. So before we get going, make sure that you have something that you can use to take notes, and be sure to turn off all other tabs and streaming devices so that you have a good connection through this presentation. So, if you're here, it means you're a school leader who's ready to make a difference in the lives of your students and colleagues. And when I say school leader, I am talking about school administrators, but I'm not only talking about school administrators because if you are a clinician or a teacher, you can absolutely be a leader on your team. And you're going to learn how in this presentation today, especially as it pertains to executive functioning. So this presentation is for you if you are a school administrator, clinician, or teacher. So that includes social workers, speech pathologists, psychologists, counselors, OTs, teachers, principals, curriculum directors, special ed administrators. And this is not an exhaustive list. I know that there are many other interventionists that would be interested in learning about executive functioning. So if you are someone who is supporting kids on a school team from early elementary all the way through high school, then this presentation is for you. So let's take a minute and talk about why you're really here. Because let's be honest, it's tough to be in the schools right now. There are constantly changing initiatives, diverse student bodies, and a lot of uncertainty about the future of education. And it's a juggling act. And there's no making everyone happy. And no matter what, you feel like you aren't doing enough, especially when you're working with students who experience anxiety and overwhelm with new challenges, who refuse or avoid difficult tasks or require constant prompting, who struggle to complete work or things that don't offer immediate gratification, who complain of boredom and have little tolerance for tasks that require repetitive practice, who have difficulty filtering distractions or controlling impulses, misunderstand directions, struggle with transitions, appear several steps behind, or experience emotional outbursts and tend to have very intense emotional reactions, or have difficulty making and keeping friends, or working collaboratively with others, both other kids and adults. And then finally, those students who make self-defeating comments, who struggle to transfer skills from one setting to another, or don't seem to learn from past mistakes, and are frequently referred for discipline issues. So I'm guessing that many of these things sound familiar. I usually get a lot of head nods when I go through this information. So chances are you've got a handful of students who have at least a couple of these things going on, or maybe you have some students that are experiencing all of these things and you know how challenging it can be. And you know that it is not just a special education issue, that a lot of students in general education are experiencing some of these things. So what's the common trend? Well, of course, we know there can be a lot of things going on with our students, but many of these things can be external signs of executive functioning challenges. And working on executive functioning, even if there are many things going on with your students, can be an important protective factor that supports language and cognition, as well as some of the other challenges that students might have going on in their lives. But I'm guessing that you might already know that since you decided to sign up for this presentation. So that's why today I'm going to go through the components of a successful executive functioning implementation plan. Now, these are things that people don't really talk about. They're not things that I ever heard when I was on a school team, and they're not things that I really hear administrators or school professionals talking about. But I can tell you from my own personal experience and the experiences of some of the school professionals that I've been able to mentor, they can be an absolute game changer. So as we go through this presentation, I wanted to let you know that you can turn closed captioning on at the bottom right-hand corner of this video, just so that you can make sure you soak up all of the important information. And then there is actually on the bottom right-hand corner of not the video screen, but the web page that this video is sitting on, there is a little blue chat box that you can use to send me a question, and I'll be able to answer your question within the next day or two. I am an SLP by training, and I started off my career spending 14 years in the school systems as an SLP, where I did a combination of direct intervention, and I was also involved in my building and district level problem solving, and I did some coaching when we were first implementing RTI. I have spent the last 18 or a little bit more years supporting professionals And slightly overlapping with my time in the schools, I got my doctorate in special education and my assistive technology graduate training, as well as my director of special education license. And during that time, I was both working in the schools, I published some peer reviewed research, and I created a framework for language intervention that supported literacy and metacognition, as well as executive functioning. And in 2015, I started an online education company supporting school professionals all over the US and English speaking countries. And at the present time of this recording, I've had over 5,000 professionals use some of my products and services designed to help school professionals create programming and interventions that support language literacy and executive functioning. I also host the De Facto Leaders podcast, which goes out to my mailing list of over 40,000 school professionals. And I currently work as a social service administrator in child welfare at the state level, managing a team that is building a caseload management system for child welfare workers who are delivering preventative services to families. What I've found after working with professionals all over the US is that when you give school professionals the right systems to create what I refer to as assets, what it does is that it frees up their mental bandwidth so they can emerge into a leadership role and actually coach each other. And that can do amazing things when it comes to being efficient with resources, managing time constraints, and most importantly, putting professionals in a position where they can share their knowledge with each other and prevent that siloing that often happens on teams when you have so much expertise, but people just aren't talking to each other. And as a result, there's a disconnect between general education and special education. So let's get into the topic of the day, which is executive functioning. Now, obviously, you probably have some idea what executive functioning is if you've decided that you thought this presentation was going to be useful. But let's start off with a definition, which is that executive functioning skills are those critical mental processes that work behind the scenes as your internal coach, acting like your brain's CEO. These powerful cognitive abilities help you manage frustration, make decisions, follow through on plans, envision the future, and adapt when things don't go expected. So you're probably starting to see now why many of those challenges that I discussed at the beginning can often be supported and can be tied to executive functioning challenges. Now, the thing that makes me so optimistic is that so many school professionals are excited to hear about executive functioning. It's probably one of the most popular things that I talk about, and I get such an overwhelming amount of interest in this topic. But school teams have a lot of challenges figuring out the how. How do we actually support executive functioning in the schools? And they're seeing a number of different things. First, many clinicians and school professionals share with me that they see poor generalization. So they're working with kids in a therapy session or a special education setting, and students don't generalize to other areas of their lives, like the general education classroom or other things that they're doing throughout the day at home or in the community. Or when they are in those outside settings, and maybe this even happens in special education settings, they are incredibly prompt dependent and require so much help, which is very challenging for both those special education professionals who are getting overburdened and have so many students that they're supporting and are getting so many referrals and just can't meet the needs of all the students that they're supposed to be serving. But at the same time, the general education professionals are also feeling overburdened, and they have students who have IEPs and need accommodations, and it feels like a lot of extra work. And a lot of times, both the special education professionals and general education professionals are kind of getting dumped on because of the poor generalization and the prompt dependence. And they know they should be working together, but there are massive time constraints that are preventing them from finding the time to make that happen. The problem is that we are using the wrong service delivery model when we think about supporting executive functioning. So let's start with one very common tool or method of service delivery that I see done in the schools and that many professionals either think they should be doing, or maybe their administration and their colleagues are telling them that this is what they should be doing, and that is the social skills groups. So I have a lot of speech pathologists, social workers, counselors, psychologists, special education teachers, people who are doing those specialized interventions where they're often pulling kids out of their classrooms to deliver some type of support. And a common way that they use that time is with the social skills group for kids who are having difficulty self-regulating, who are showing some of those challenging behaviors in their classrooms or other settings, or having a difficult time working with others and form relationships. The biggest challenge, you guessed it, there is typically very poor generalization with this model. Why does this happen? Well, typically a social skills group like that picture on the left-hand side, is a very structured academic-like situation. And then kids have to take that information that they learned that typically involves something that is adult-led and it's very structured and they have to answer questions and explain what they hypothetically would do. But then they have to go out to situations like the one on the right, where there's a lot of things going on and they've got to constantly read the room and use their working memory skills to process all kinds of information and make decisions and self-regulate on the spot. And it just simply doesn't transfer over. They're not actually practicing the skills that they need to work on in that setting. When we think about service delivery models, this is where the social skills group fits. So as you look at the screen that I'm sharing right now, think of these boxes as different types of service delivery. The ones in green are the ones that are actually happening. The ones with the red X's are the things that are not being done if we're using that social skills group model in isolation. So what we do have that's great is we've got some front loading. Maybe we're pre-teaching skills or having conversations with kids to give them some knowledge. We might be doing this in a direct therapy setting or maybe a resource room setting. And a lot of times what I see happening is that social skills groups are really utilizing what I refer to as contained lesson plans, where the social skills, quote, lesson plan is the entire intervention. It begins and ends with that lesson plan. And it doesn't really move to those other service delivery models that I've got on the bottom of the screen, which is real life application and review and evaluation. Because it stops there with this top box, that's why we don't see good generalization. Because yes, we do have to front load and pre-teach. That can be helpful. But that's just the beginning. It would be like if we went to the gym and warmed up, but didn't do our full workout. There's often a discrepancy between knowledge issues and performance issues when it comes to executive functioning specifically. This discrepancy can be due to issues with perspective taking and situational awareness. So being able to read situations on the spot, to use your working memory skills, to attend and inhibit, all of those things that are executive functioning skills, which you don't have to do as much if you have a structured adult-led situation. All of these things, so things like perspective taking, situational awareness, are highly tied to executive functioning skills. So working memory, inhibitory control, ideational fluency, that ability to come up with ideas quickly on the spot, and then also your ability to self-regulate and monitor as you're doing all of those things. Sometimes kids have the skill and the knowledge of what they should do, which is great and something we can learn in a social skills group. That might be present in many kids, but if they have weak executive functioning skills, those could be impacting their performance and utilization of that knowledge that they do have. Now, let me give you another example where schools get it partly right, but they're missing some key steps. And that is with things like checklists and visual supports or other cognitive tools that are often offered to kids across settings. So it's great that we're recognizing that kids need those supports, both as something that all kids have, and we sometimes do these things for kids that need that extra help. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I have all of the skills that happen in your head as you're using some kind of a scheduler or a checklist. So first, you have to envision the end goal, visualize the steps to take and the materials that you need, estimate how long it will take, think about potential obstacles and contingencies that are coming up as you're going through your plan. You have to generate a bunch of options to think about what needs to go on this list. What are the steps that I need to take? What does future success look like? And then you have to encode those steps into language. And that's where we get to the step where you have your pencil out or your device or whatever it is you're writing your list on, and you're actually writing it down. And then if we're using that checklist to actually create some action and do something, whether it be something that we're doing right now that's in front of us, or whether it be something that is something more ongoing, then we have to initiate that first step. And then as we're carrying out the things on the list, we have to evaluate our progress, notice the time, notice if we're on track, shift and redirect and adjust and change our list if we realize that there's other things that we forgot. You have to remember to reference back to it if you're using a list or a calendar or an assignment book. So you've got to be able to think back on those past events, which is what we are doing when we're utilizing our episodic memory, and apply it to the future to know, how do I even utilize this strategy effectively? The long story short is, this is a lot of stuff. And what we typically do when we give kids a checklist is that they are copying a list down from a board that a teacher has delivered to them, or maybe we're doing the checklist for kids and just giving it to them. When you are writing things down for a child and they're not involved in any of the planning and processes and not engaging in those internal mental processes needed to even think about what to put on a list, then we're essentially creating a situation where kids are likely to become prompt dependent. With things like checklists or any kind of tools that you might be giving kids in classrooms, what often ends up happening is that when we look at these ideal service delivery models that we might want to use, what we're trying to do is essentially jump to that real life application without any front loading or teaching of how to use that strategy. And then we're probably not going back and reviewing and evaluating how they might use that tool as well. So again, we've got part of the solution in place, but we're missing some key steps here. The thing to take away here is that tools alone for organizing, those are not executive functioning skills or strategies. Organizing tools like timers, lists, planners, they're what we are using when we already are engaging our executive functioning skills. Our executive functioning skills are what makes us have the thought in our heads, I'm not going to remember all this information, so I better write it down. We're already thinking into the future to think that a strategy or a tool might be relevant to us. Service delivery for executive functioning needs to include all three contexts that I've described. So we need to have front loading or priming, where we have that explicit instruction teaching kids specific skills. And then we need to give them that opportunity for real life application, sometimes with support, but not too much support because we don't want kids to be prompt dependent. And then we've got to have that review or evaluation where we talk about what we learned in the front loading and what happened during the real life application. And then this is a cycle. We review and evaluate, and then we start to prepare for other situations that are coming up. And then we have more real life application. You might have students who just pick up on things. You can give them tools like planners and all kinds of things, and they can intuitively figure out how to use them. But those students who are struggling with executive functioning might need that explicit instruction in order to know how to use those tools effectively or to be able to benefit from some of the instruction that they're getting. Now, the biggest challenge with executive functioning is that it's so abstract. So if you have interventionists who are thinking, I could do a front-loading session with students and pre-teach, and then I might be able to work with some teachers, and we might be able to collaborate. But the question is, what are we actually teaching them? What skills and protocols are we following when we're front-loading or trying to give teachers strategies for classroom-based tools that they might use. Well, what I found to be extremely helpful is to organize executive functioning into tangible skills that can then form that foundation. What we want to do is pick the activities that kids are already doing. Those are the things that we want to teach. But what we do is embed work on time perception, self-talk, future pacing, episodic memory, and encoding, which essentially can serve as that executive functioning intervention, simply layered onto what kids are already doing. And working on those 5 skills, so the ability to sense the passage of time and have a concept of what time is, to use self-talk, to engage in internal planning, as well as talk to yourself and, talk yourself through those difficult situations. Future pacing, so thinking and visualizing into the future and envisioning what the end goal looks like and the steps look like. Using episodic memory to have that mental picture of past experiences, and then using encoding, which is just your ability to go back and forth between those visual representations in your head and language so that you can actually use things like checklists, because you're able to take those visual representations and translate them into language that you might use with different cognitive tools that you could use to keep yourself organized. Now, ensuring the support is continuous may look different whether it's special education or general education, and there is a little bit of an overlap, which you might see in the middle. So when we think of front-loading real-life practice and review and evaluation, there are a number of different containers or strategies where this can happen, and it can be done. All 3 of those things can be done in both general and special education, whether it be through special education direct instruction, specialized services, accommodations, and through making sure that we have the correct IEP goals. The thing to take away is that when it comes to special education, you might be doing front load and review for the purpose of delivering specialized services in accordance with IEP goals. But in general education, you can be doing it as a universal support initiative. So something that helps all of your students and helps teachers to target those curriculum standards and deliver the curriculum and use direct instruction for all kids. The big shift is that we want to stop thinking about executive functioning as something that is solely for special education, solely for those services that are on IEPs or those accommodations or those IEP goals. And we want to expand to thinking about executive functioning in the context of universal supports for all students, with the hope that it will make it, rather than feeling like extra work or accommodations, which is often how special education accommodations feel for general education teachers. Instead, we want them to be ingrained habits that they can embed and have accessible to them to use for any student who needs it. When we increase the tools in everyone's toolbox, what that does is that it's going to take the burden off of those special education professionals, because they are going to get fewer referrals. And those students that do need specialized support are going to be better supported. And then for the general education teachers, making supporting executive functioning habit is going to help them better differentiate and implement executive functioning interventions with ease when they do need to do something above and beyond for a student that has special accommodations. Now, obviously, when I talk about up-leveling the skills of both general and special ed professionals, everybody thinks that that's a good idea. But how do we actually make this happen? Now, obviously, this is a multi-tiered process, but typically the first step is starting with a select group of people and training them to implement tools and strategies that support executive functioning, and then having those people start with a pilot, work out the kinks in how they might implement this, and then serve as coaches for other staff in the building. And what this does is twofold. First, it helps people to get solid in what their process is so they can more easily have conversations with others. And it helps people who might be in that special ed teacher or related service provider role feel more confident in coaching their peers and going to them and to share their knowledge and expertise. Here are some examples of professionals that have gone through, and this is actually my language therapy program. And what I've been able to do with some of my intervention programs is teach therapists a framework that helps them feel confident so that they're clear on their protocol and they know how to explain it to other staff. And also so that they're spending less time planning for those direct interventions and they have additional bandwidth to be able to consult and support other people in their buildings. So if you were to choose a select group of people in the building, or maybe you, as a related service provider or special education teacher, you want to start this initiative in your building and maybe enlist the support from some of your peers to get this going. How would you get this started? Well, it starts with assets and pilots. So when I'm talking about assets, what I mean are resources, things, people, or sometimes qualities like skills that have potential to create future benefit. So, in the context of executive functioning, typically what I'm talking about is resources, so things that you can actually create that can serve as plans or protocols that you can share with other people to explain how to do something. And then also protocols that you can kind of repeat without a ton of planning because you've gotten so good at going through the process. Now, when I'm talking about a pilot, I'm talking about a test of some kind of a plan or a project that's done before introducing it widely. As I said before, a lot of clinicians who have a ton of expertise are a little bit nervous about their own skills as a teacher or a clinician. And what they want to do is do some test runs on their own with the small groups of their students before they might go and approach another clinician or a teacher or maybe even their administrator. If we have this group of people that could potentially coach others, we've essentially created something, some kind of a program or intervention that we can easily share if there's going to be coaching and consultation. And this is exactly what I do in my School of Clinical Leadership program. So I call it the School of Clinical Leadership because it really started off with this idea of clinicians being able to share their skills with other people. But what it's evolved into is a program that helps schools to start with these mini pilots and creation of assets and roll out these interventions to their entire team across both general and special education. So here is an example of an asset that I would help people create for an executive functioning implementation plan in the program. So what this is on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the time tracking journal. What this does is it walks through exactly how you would help a student plan, use things like self-talk and strategic planning, build their time perception skills, as well as their self-monitoring skills for anything that requires multiple steps. So I call this within tasks time perception because what it does is it helps kids engage in that strategic planning for something that might happen during a class period or a short intervention session. A common thing that people use it for would be getting your materials ready in the morning, maybe during morning routine. A lot of times kids have a difficult time getting their things together. It's something that parents could potentially use for helping their kids go downstairs and make a meal or get ready for school in the morning or make their bed and get ready for bed or clean their room. But during academic tasks, one of the most common places where I've used it is during writing interventions, which requires a lot of steps and can be really overwhelming for students. And then the other thing that I focus on where I recommend building assets for executive functioning is what I refer to as across tasks. So the time tracking journal is focused on time perception and planning within tasks. So within a short period of time for something that is right in front of you right now. And then across tasks would be over those long time periods. So planning over the course of an entire day or a week or maybe even a month. So developing an asset and a protocol that you can use with kids to start teaching some of those skills and start embedding into their daily tasks so they can get better at planning into the future and thinking ahead. Another type of asset that you could create would be protocols that help students through various social situations to build things like procedural knowledge and to understand the different social contexts that they might be experiencing. So that's another area where I support people in the School of Clinical Leadership. So these are just some examples of executive functioning assets that you can create to ensure that there is continuous support across tier one all the way through specialized services. So we have assets that support time perception within tasks, like the time journal that I talked about, time perception across tasks, which is also something that I support people with creating, social skills, front loading and review, which I also have a number of different protocols that you can use to create assets for that. Things like your individual or team master planning process, which is also something that I support people with, as well as asynchronous communication processes, ways for people to communicate and share their knowledge that doesn't require them to be in person. Not that we want to eliminate in person, but let's be honest, we're all super busy and we need ways to be efficient so we can share our skills and reduce siloing. Also, we want to think about how can we involve parents? So how can we use some of those assets that we're creating to create training materials or coaching plans or strategies that we can use to increase communication with parents or other training materials. So as we're creating our assets, how can we create training materials that allow staff to efficiently share their knowledge and skills with other people? And then the final thing that I've got on the bottom there is scaffolding strategies and habits. Now, we've talked about the problems with service delivery and how we need to make a shift so that we can stop overburdening both general and special education and make this feel like habit. I've also talked about the components of successful service delivery, so front loading real life practice and review and evaluation. And then the first step to a successful executive functioning implementation plan, which is understanding that concept of asset creation and pilots. And now we're moving on to what I refer to as asset stacking. Thank you so much for listening. This is the part of the presentation where I get into the second element of an effective executive functioning implementation plan. So I discussed assets and pilots, and I was just about to start discussing asset stacking, and then the final component, which is master planning. So if you're interested in learning about asset stacking and master planning and how you can use them to create an executive functioning implementation plan that supports students in a way that's research-based, that improves generalization, and also doesn't overwhelm your team, then definitely check out the full training where you can also see the video version so you can see some of the infographics and visuals that I'm sharing as I'm presenting. So to watch the training, all you need to do is go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/EF Teams where you can sign up. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating or review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please share it with your friends and colleagues if you know someone who needs this information. Thank you so much again, and I will see you next time.